One family, 20% of a nation's GDP. It's not a monarchy. At least, not officially. But welcome to South Korea, where the phone in your pocket, the TV in your living room, the credit card in your wallet, the apartment you live in, even the hospital where you were born, all of it funnels money back to the same bloodline, the Lee family. You think you understand capitalism. You don't. Because capitalism isn't supposed to look like this. It's not supposed to concentrate so completely, so elegantly, and so permanently in the hands of 3 generations. But here's the dark truth. Samsung didn't build South Korea. South Korea built Samsung. And then, Samsung bought it back, piece by piece. This is the story of how a company became indistinguishable from a national destiny. How a business dynasty turned into something else entirely. Something closer to royalty. This is Empire Econ. In 1953, the so-called South Korean economy was nothing more than a pile of ash. Literally. After the Korean War, the entire peninsula had been flattened. The soil was so poisoned by artillery fire that grass struggled to grow, let alone rice. At that time, the average Korean lived on less than $70 a year. Let that sink in. $70 for 365 days of survival. People scavenged for tree bark and boiled leather belts just to deceive their screaming stomachs. This wasn't just poverty. It was the collapse of a civilization. But in the shadows of this misery, Lee Byung-chul was already calculating. He didn't start with semiconductors or high-rises. He started with dried fish and noodles. Lee understood a truth that theoretical economists often miss. In a devastated nation, the man who controls the food supply chain controls the lifeblood of the people. Then, the turning point arrived in 1961. Park Chung-hee, a military general with a cold mind and a heart of steel, seized power in a coup. Park didn't believe in the invisible hand of the market. He looked at the ruins of his country and saw a machine in need of a master mechanic. Park summoned the few surviving businessmen to a cold hotel room. Among them was Lee Byung-chul. Park didn't offer a partnership. He delivered an ultimatum, a survival pact in the literal sense. I give you capital, I give you workers, and I grant you a monopoly. In exchange, you build the industries I dictate. Succeed, and you will be royalty. Fail, and you disappear. This was the moment that Chaebol was born. A monarchy dressed in the suit of capitalism. Samsung was handpicked as the lead architect for the so-called miracle on the Han River. The government nationalized every bank, seizing every cent of foreign aid, money originally meant for medicine and bread, to funnel it directly into Samsung's pockets. Lee Byung-chul was granted a monopoly on everything from sugar and textiles to fertilizer. Why? Because a monster raised by the state is easier to control than 1,000 small businesses. This relationship was a terrifying symbiosis. The government banned unions entirely, allowing Samsung to wring 80 hours a week out of workers in sweltering factories. In return, Samsung built the highways, launched the cargo ships, and forged the steel that armored the nation's borders. But as the skyscrapers began to rise, the boundary between the Blue House and Samsung's boardroom evaporated. The government was no longer the manager. They became the enforcer of Samsung's will. The people cheered because the hunger was gone. They rejoiced as they traded their rotting shacks for concrete apartments. They were so busy being grateful for the rice on their tables that they failed to notice the price tag. They traded their political agency for a color television. They didn't realize that the foundation of their modern life was now held entirely in the hands of a single family. Samsung didn't just succeed in Korea. Samsung replaced the state. They became the provider, the protector, and the ultimate law. By the time the world realized what was happening, the miracle was complete. And the Lee family had successfully turned a nation's desperation into their own private, permanent estate. How does one family rule 60 massive corporations while owning less than 5% of the total equity? The answer doesn't lie in genius. It lies in a system we call financial incest, or, in the sanitized language of lawyers, cross-shareholding. Imagine a circle of 3 people. Person A lends money to person B. Person B lends to person C. And person C lends that same money back to person A. On paper, everyone holds billions in assets. In reality, it is a single coin traveling in an endless, locked loop. Samsung has turned this game into a high art. Samsung Life Insurance, the vault holding the lifelong savings and insurance premiums of millions of Koreans, uses that very capital to buy shares in Samsung C&T. Samsung C&T then uses those funds to control the diamond in the crown, Samsung Electronics. Finally, Samsung Electronics loops back to ensure the Lee family's grip remains absolute over Samsung Life. It is a labyrinth of paper, a fortress built on phantom numbers. This system ensures a terrifying reality. Even if a Lee heir is incompetent or sitting behind bars, the family can never be toppled. You cannot execute a hostile takeover of a spiderweb when you don't even know where it begins. But a throne requires more than just imaginary numbers on a stock ticker. It requires subjects who are blindly loyal. That is why they created a social class, the Samsung man. In the West, you work for a company to get a paycheck. In Korea, you join Samsung to be recognized as a human being. Samsung's recruitment exam, the SSAT, is more brutal than the bar exam. To become a Samsung man means you have officially entered the nation's elite. It is a golden ticket that guarantees you an apartment in the sleek, Samsung-built Ramian Towers, a social standing that makes peers tremble with envy, and most importantly, an absolute advantage in the marriage market. Mothers in Seoul don't dream of their daughters marrying poets or intellectuals. They dream of a son-in-law wearing the blue Samsung badge on his chest. Samsung has privatized the very concept of success. They have built a world where the highest ambition of a young person is not to create something new for humanity, but to become a perfect, high-performance cog in the Lee family's machine. They don't just buy your labor, they buy your self-worth. By the way, if you want to see the tangled strings that actually move this world, hit the subscribe button for Empire Econ. We deconstruct the things the mainstream media is too afraid to name. The Lee family doesn't just own shipyards or semiconductor fabs. They own an entire ecosystem that tracks you from the cradle to the grave. They have cultivated a pervasive fear that without Samsung, you are nothing. You are cast out of the orbit of prosperity. This trap isn't built with barbed wire or armed guards. It is built with convenience, an absolute, suffocating convenience that makes people willing to kneel in exchange for protection. The House of Lee doesn't just run a conglomerate. They run a modern religion, where profit is the scripture, and obedience is the only path to salvation. The greatest lie, we are told, is that Samsung is the pride of Korea, a shining symbol of a miraculous rise from the ashes. But behind the neon glow of foldable phones and cutting-edge semiconductors lies the rusted, iron core of a feudal system. In 2016, that modern mask finally slipped. The world realized, with horror, that this kingdom wasn't being run by precise algorithms or visionary leadership, but by archaic, backroom deals that belong in a medieval court. At the center of the storm was the crown prince, Lee Jae-yong. As his father lay incapacitated in a hospital bed, Lee needed to consolidate his grip on the empire. He orchestrated a controversial merger between 2 Samsung affiliates, a deal designed to hand him absolute control without spending a single cent of his own money. The only problem? The merger would wipe out hundreds of millions of dollars from the National Pension Fund, the retirement savings of ordinary Korean citizens. To buy the government's blessing, Lee didn't hesitate to deploy tens of millions of dollars, but he didn't hand the cash over in a briefcase. The money was funneled under the guise of equestrian training for the daughter of a woman named Choi Soon-sil. She held no office. She had no political rank. She was a shaman. Yes, you heard that right. The world's leading technology giant, a pioneer of the future, was paying tribute to a spirit guide to bribe the president. This woman reportedly controlled President Park Geun-hye, the daughter of the very dictator who created the Samsung system decades ago, influencing everything from her wardrobe to high-stakes national policy. This isn't a political thriller on Netflix. This is the raw, naked truth of how power operates in the Samsung Republic. When a dynasty needs to be transferred, laws become scrap paper, and those in power are willing to bow before spiritual mystics to protect the family estate. Millions of South Koreans took to the streets, a sea of candlelight demanding justice. The president was impeached and sent to prison. The crown prince was handcuffed and sentenced. For a brief moment, the world believed in a historic turning point, a day when the Chaebols would finally bow to the rule of law. But then, the bitter reality of the Samsung Republic set in. While Lee Jae-yong sat in a cell, the Korean economy began to hold its breath. The media, largely funded by Samsung's advertising, began a relentless campaign of fear. They warned of a global chip crisis, claiming that without the crown prince at the helm, the nation's economy would face total collapse. The invisible pressure of capital made the judicial system tremble. The result? Lee Jae-yong was released on parole. Shortly after, he received a full presidential pardon. The official reason? To contribute to the development of the national economy. It was a lethal blow to the concept of equality. It confirmed a grim reality. In South Korea, you can bribe a president. You can manipulate the pensions of an entire nation. But as long as your name is Lee, there is always an exit. Justice here isn't blind. It's simply busy looking at Samsung's balance sheet. Samsung is no longer too big to fail. They have become too big to punish. When one family holds the lifeblood of a nation, the law ceases to be a tool for justice and becomes a shield for the violators. The miracle on the Han River has reached its final form. A state within a state, where the king is above the law, because the law is bought by the king. The empire of the Lee family wasn't built solely on silicon chips or multi-billion-dollar contracts. It was built on a calculated, cold-blooded trade-off of human agency. Behind the seamless curves of the Galaxy phone in your hand lies a reality far less polished. For decades, Samsung faced grueling legal battles regarding workers in its semiconductor plants, developing leukemia and other rare cancers due to chemical exposure. These weren't just industrial accidents. They were the byproduct of a culture that prioritized production speed over biological safety. For years, the company denied the link, using its massive legal department to silence grieving families. But Samsung doesn't need to panic. When you hold the world's supply chain by the throat, a formal apology and a calculated settlement are enough to keep the gears turning. The phones must ship. The profits must grow. The empire never sleeps. However, the true tragedy isn't found in the factories. It's at the very heart of Seoul. Modern South Korea is a nation of paradoxes. Incredibly wealthy, hyper-modern, yet profoundly lonely and stagnant. The nation has the lowest birth rate in the world, dropping to a staggering 0.7. Why? Because the Samsung model has sucked the life out of the country. The cutthroat competition to enter a Chaebol has turned life for young people into a zero-sum game starting in kindergarten. They stop having children. They stop dreaming of anything beyond the corporate ladder because they are too busy trying to survive within the system. South Korea ranks dead last among developed nations in entrepreneurship. Why would you risk creating something new? When Samsung owns the capital, the talent, and the very laws of the land. Samsung acts like a financial black hole. It is so massive that it bends the light around it, sucking the oxygen out of the economy until nothing green can grow in its shadow. And now, the House of Lee is exporting this model to the world. As you watch this, Samsung is manufacturing the brains for NATO weapon systems. They are building the batteries for the electric cars on American streets. They are financing the iconic skyscrapers that define the skyline of Dubai. The Lee family has achieved the impossible. They have successfully privatized a civilization. So, as you hold your device today, ask yourself, is this a tool of freedom, or is it a digital tether to a dynasty you never voted for? In a country you've never visited, the Samsung Republic is no longer just a Korean story. It is a blueprint for a future where corporations are larger than nations and bloodlines are more powerful than ballots. The cage is gilded. It's connected to 5G, and it has a brilliant 120 Hz display. But make no mistake, it is still a cage. And the most terrifying part, no one is trying to break out. Because once you've been inside long enough, you realize the Lee family didn't just buy a nation. They bought our future. This is Empire Econ.